Tamaria, good morning. One bank has labelled it the misery index. Skyrocketing inflation has hit a three-decade high of 6.9%. It could go higher. But New Zealand is not alone. In the UK, inflation is 7%. In the US, 8.5%. Yet, National says our government should be doing more to control it. How? Well, I'm joined now by National's finance spokesperson, Nicola Willis. Morena, thanks for your time this morning.
Morena.
So the government says overseas factors are mostly responsible for record inflation, and that is true, isn't it?
Well, there are overseas factors. There are also domestic factors.
Mostly
and the numbers
overseas?
this week show that.
Yeah.
Well, the numbers this week show that we've got record high non-tradable inflation. That's the domestic inflation rate. That's hit 6% too.
And the imported inflation is 8.5%.
That's correct.
OK, so they are right in saying it's mostly overseas?
They are right in saying that there are some global factors. They are wrong in denying that we have a homegrown issue as well. They are wrong in not coming up with a plan for addressing it, and they're wrong for denying their part in solving it.
So the homegrown issue is what? Food prices, or what is it?
Well, the homegrown issue is that we have a lot of money in the economy and we have a lot of constraints in the economy. So we think it's time for the government to take steps to address that. So,
all right. We're going to come up and ask you what those steps are, but you just talked about a whole lot of money in the economy. So one of the biggest contributors to domestic inflation is housing costs, right? They're up like 18%, even bigger when you take into rents and building costs, all those kinds of things. Do you agree that it's because of the cheap money that was pumped into the economy by the Reserve Bank?
When we break down that housing cost component of CPI, what we see is that rents are actually a really important factor, and they've gone up $50 a week on average in the past year alone. So that's obviously contributing to the cost of living for many New Zealanders.
Yeah, but there are other housing costs as well, aren't there?
There are other housing costs too. The other thing that the CPI inflation looks at is construction costs. Those are clearly up. We're seeing big constraints in the construction sector.
And costs of getting into a new home as well.
But the mortgage rates, which are what people think about, they're not even covered by the CPI. That's a whole nother world of pain, which is how much people are now going to be paying as interest rates go up.
But did the cheap money cause this?
Well, absolutely. When you look around the world, we have had low interest rates, we've had a lot of quantitative easing, and economists will tell you that when you have a lot of money in the economy and you have supply constraints, that can drive inflation.
Did National support that cheap money?
National absolutely supported efforts to keep the economy going during a very difficult time. I want to paint you a picture, though, of where we are now.
Yeah, I know, but you did support that cheap money at the time, OK? Because of the pandemic,
we supported moves by the Reserve Bank to lower interest rates to help get us through a pandemic.
OK, so on the Reserve Bank, you can paint me a picture in a moment, but managing inflation is the responsibility of the Reserve Bank.
Yes, it is.
And the chair, Adrian Orr, says the bank's not in a good place right now in terms of inflation.
That's right.
Has he mismanaged the pandemic?
Well, we would start with actually what is his job, and we think Labor confused his job by adding another mandate. It used to be pure price stability. They added maximum sustainable employment. We've said, let's just keep it the way it was for 30 years, that crystal clear focus on price stability. That's what we'd like the Reserve Bank focused on. But what Adrian Orr has also pointed to is the need to be supported by targeted, effective fiscal policies, and National absolutely supports that. This is a time for the government to be very careful.
Targeted policies.
That's right, not to add inflationary fuel to the fire with a spend
the government says
approach.
that Adrian Orr wasn't actually referring to them specifically, he's speaking in general terms.
Well, he may have been speaking in general terms, but included in that is New Zealand. Let's look at how much we're spending as a country, because what you will hear from the government is this was all about COVID. Well, actually, in 2021 and 2020, we were spending 108, 109 billion. This year, 128 billion. This is the year without lockdowns.
And how much is it going to be next year?
120 billion.
Yeah, so it's going down again. As a result, as we come out, we open up, it's going down. The spend is coming down.
It is extraordinarily a lot more than we were pre-COVID. So in 2017, National was spending...
Unprecedented times, right?
National was spending a lot less than that, 52 billion less than that. And so we have to ask ourselves, is it appropriate, having come through the pandemic, having come through the lockdowns, having done all of that, to be having that level of spend and continuing to add to it?
And of course the government would say that spend is to address the deficit left by National.
Well, we would say, prove to us that you are getting value for every dollar. Okay. And I think of multiple examples where I'm not seeing the discipline and careful economic management that New Zealanders have a right to.
I will ask you for those examples in just a sec. Just before we move on to that, though, interest rates are rising fast, as you mentioned. So are you concerned that it could go too fast, stop people spending, raise a prospect of recession?
Well, I respect the independence of the Reserve Bank and the fact that it has a job to do to get on top of inflation, and that involves rising interest rates. But I'm very sympathetic to the fact that that is tough medicine for a lot of people. You know, I think about the first home buyers who leveraged to the max in a inflated housing market and now will be faced with mortgage debt that will be rising, with some estimates saying up to half of people who bought a first home last year will be in some mortgage stress. So that's really concerning to me.
So part of your relief, OK, let's talk about raising tax thresholds. This is your policy. You want to give a bit of tax back, but that is not targeted. That gives benefits to the people who earn more.
Well, it is actually very targeted. It's targeted at the squeezed middle. Because when you hear Grant Robertson talking, he'll say that, look, he's lifted working for families entitlements. Well, what about the nurses, the police, the teachers who are earning an average income and don't get any tax relief, but are being squeezed every time they go to the supermarket, every time they fill up the pump, every time they pay rent? We want to target some tax relief to them, and that's what our tax package.
But it also, the more you earn, the more you get back out of your policy, right?
That's correct. Yeah. Yes, because you are paying a lot more tax. But
that's not targeted, is it?
It is, because for the average income earner, what it would mean is that they would benefit to the tune of $850 a year. Now, compare that with Grant Robertson's approach. He says zero for the middle income earner. We want to target those people. We know that they are working hard. We know that they are struggling. And we also know that Grant Robertson's benefiting from inflation. He's taking in an extra $12.5 billion in income tax.
OK, well, let's talk about the rest of your tax policy, though, because you have a complete tax package, right? And that includes removing the top tax bracket of 39% for earnings over $180,000. That's right, isn't it?
What we've put forward...
Is that right? That's right.
Let me explain. What we've put forward is a tax package for this budget that says if we were sitting in Grant Robertson's chair, we would say it's time to inflation adjust tax brackets. Yeah. We've put forward a package that's costed at $1.7 billion, which we think should be prioritised in this budget.
But
what
overall,
we've also foreshadowed for the future is that we will look to get rid of other taxes that this government has introduced. And what I can share with you, Simon, is that when we come closer to the election and we lay out the details of our fiscal plan, I want to ensure that New Zealanders can have absolute confidence in that plan. So I will be writing to Grant Robertson to say to him, well, let's have another look at your idea of a budget responsibility office, because actually independently verifying our costings is something National is absolutely up for.
Great.
We think it's time to focus the debate on the policies.
Because Simon Bridges didn't want that, and you've turned around on that.
Well, it's something that we are very determined needs to be done properly, so we want to have a discussion with Grant Robertson to ensure that office is
and I'm sure the voters would love to see an independent costing of all policies ahead of the election. Let's go back to your policy about getting rid of the 39% tax bracket for people who earn over $180,000. How does that help the squeezed middle?
Well, what our concern is always is that we want to be sure that people know that when they work hard in this country, when they innovate, when they put in a little bit extra, that they will gain from that.
Right, so but that's not the squeezed middle you're talking about there at all, is it?
Look, someone earning in that bracket is not in the squeeze middle, but our tax package that we are putting forward right now absolutely squarely targets the squeezed middle. And I just put to you again, Grant Robertson is ignoring those people. And we think that that's a real problem because they are struggling.
So you said it's going to cost $1.7 billion.
That's right.
In this budget.
That's right.
If you put $1.7 billion back into the economy, isn't that inflationary?
Well, let's take a step back. Grant Robertson is planning...
Isn't it inflationary? That puts more people out there to spend money.
No, it's not, because the alternative is that Grant Robertson spends that money on his pet projects. And I would put to you, can we really trust that he will spend New Zealanders' money better than they will?
This is about your policy.
And let me tell you about some examples that give me rise to question whether he can spend it better. Let's talk about $2.75 million for the mongrel mob to run a drug rehab program.
$2.75 million
Let's talk
is
about
nothing.
$24 million for Kainga Ora to renovate their corporate offices. Well, let's talk about then the $1.9 billion for mental health that the Mental Health Commission itself has said has not delivered any additional specialist services. What we need right now is a government that doesn't just focus on the dollars on the press release, but on delivery, on results,
So you're
on
criticising
outcomes.
him for not... you're actually saying the forthcoming budget, $6 billion operational spend coming up. A big one, OK?
The biggest in history, Simon.
Would you not do that?
Going on
Okay,
the biggest
would you not do
spend up in
that?
history. Well, we think it is very hard to justify
So you wouldn't
in
do
the
it?
context of huge spending in this economy right now, that every single project that he's proposing
have you worked out how much you
will
would
make
spend?
sense.
Because you're going to take $1.7 billion of tax cuts out of that $6 billion. You're not going to spend $6 billion. There's going to be a lot less for operational.
Well, what we'd start by doing is going through the spend that's happening right now. As I outlined to you earlier, we are spending $128 billion, the government is this year, compared to $109 billion during the peak of the pandemic. So I would go through that budget line by line right now. I'd say to every single minister, can you confirm for me that you're being as careful with Kiwis' money as they are having to be right now?
Well, are
you making sure you're not wasting money on bureaucracy, on backroom stuff?
You wanted to have examples. Let's talk specifics, OK? So, to fund your packages, would you get rid of things like the Māori Health Authority? Yes?
Yes, we would get rid of the
OK, so that's only going to save about $98 million that was allocated last year. What about the general health reforms?
So on the general health reforms, I think people will be surprised to know the government has already budgeted $500 million for those. And what I would say to you is I would rather see precious health dollars going into more hospital bed space, not more desk space in Wellington.
So does that mean...
We're concerned that these bureaucratic reforms will drive a lot of middle management, will drive a lot of red tape,
does that mean
and
you'll
won't
get rid of
actually
them?
Result in better services for patients.
Will you not go ahead with the health reforms?
Well,
or will you rescind them if you get in?
If we were sitting around the cabinet table right now, having a health system under stress, under pressure, having just come through a global pandemic, would we then say to them we're going to put a huge round of restructuring on top?
You are not sitting around that table now.
No.
In 15 months, if you were sitting around that table, would those health reforms be gone?
Well, I would be very reluctant to relaunch another program of restructuring.
So they stay.
I think that we will encounter a fatigued health workforce who won't be up for more change.
What other things would you look at then? Okay. What about, would you suspend government superannuation contributions to pay for what you need to pay for?
Well, our position on that has always been that we need to accept the fiscal conditions and look at whether those contributions are appropriate.
Right.
And so we will assess the fiscal conditions at the time to see whether they are. In general, our approach...
It's possible?
Simon, in general, our approach is going to be about... Can we guarantee that the dollars we are taking from New Zealanders are then resulting in better services for them?
That's a nice general...
But look, let's look at the specifics of that. One of the first things that this Labor government did was remove targets for the public service. And so what have we seen as a result? Actually, whether it's State House waiting times, whether it's treatment times in the emergency department, all of those things have gone backwards, despite billions more being poured in. So our approach is about value for money, driving results.
Chris Luxon indicated that he wants to increase the defence spend up to 2%. That would be another $1.7 billion.
Well, that's something that we will be looking at. And as I've said to you, I'm going to present a fiscal plan before the next election.
Yep.
And I am happy to subject that to external scrutiny, to independent verification. It'll be a plan that stacks up, and it'll be a plan that represents our party's values, which are that if you're working hard in this country, you're putting in innovation, you're putting in effort, then you deserve to feel like you're getting ahead. And right now, that is not how New Zealanders are feeling. They're slipping backwards. And the reality is, when costs are going up as fast as they are, it's costing your average household an extra $150 a week, and wages aren't keeping up, and there's not prospects for the future. People are feeling desperate. And Grant Robertson can sit to one side and say, I'm doing everything perfect,
and
but
you don't
we
believe
disagree.
him. Okay. Before you go, I'm going to clarify a couple of things that your leader, Chris Luxon, has flopped on. So Matariki holiday stays?
Yes.
Labor Day stays?
Yes.
Did he confuse everybody with those comments?
Possibly.
Okay, so public transport, subsidised?
Yes.
So did he confuse people with those comments as well?
Possibly. Do you know what? Chris Luxon...
Did he run these positions past caucus?
Chris Luxon has never stood up and said, I'm going to say everything perfectly. But I think New Zealanders are a bit over politicians who are all about words. They are now about people who will drive results. He's got a track record of driving results, and I would put him up against this current administration.
And I'm sure you will, but is he making policy up on the fly and then having to flip-flop it?
Oh, no, look, as he said himself, and, you know, I acknowledge his humility, he didn't express himself as well as he could. Is that what New Zealanders are talking about this week, Simon? I don't think so.
Well, it was a distraction. In a week where you should be on CPI, it was a distraction.
Well, I'll tell you what New Zealanders are focused on, the sacrifices they're making in their homes. Can we afford to pay the kids swimming lessons this year?
OK.
At the supermarket, what are we not going to put in the trolley?
So, one last question.
Mince has reached $19 a kilo.
Recent poll numbers have put Te Pāti Māori as the king or queen maker just this week. So they'll say they'll go with whichever party is more treaty-centric. Does that rule you out next election?
I don't think so. National has a very proud track record when it comes to treaty settlements, when it comes to acknowledging the grievances that iwi have against the Crown, and that is a tradition that we will be proud to continue.
Okay.
No.
All right. Nicola Willis, Finance Spokesperson for National, thank you very much for your time today.
Thank you.